So welcome back. This is Paul Nazarevich, and Reese Davis is not going to be joining us today, but Andrew's here. So we're going to talk about pre-flop play from the first four positions, under the gun, middle position, cutoff, and button. I feel like playing from the blinds needs its whole separate episode, so we're going to focus on that in episode number 6. So the things we're going to cover today is kind of ranges from the first four positions, and these are kind of like guidelines and things for you to think about. Whether to overlimp or iso raise, 3-betting, squeezing, and a few words about 4-betting. So we're just going to lay some groundwork out and focus a lot more on these things in upcoming episodes, because a lot of them involve post-flop play as well, but we're just going to lay some theory out today. So since Reese is not here, we had a homework assignment from him, but we're going to look at Andrew's homework. This is from the last episode. So he found a 10 NL player who's playing 24, 18, and 2.36. So these seem like pretty solid pre-flop stats. And one of the notes you have on him is that he overcalls an under-the-gun raise with 7/8 or Jack-8 suited, and then iso raises in the cutoff with Ace-5 suited. So I think iso raising in the cutoff with 8-5 suited is okay. Overcalling an under-the-gun raise on the button with 7/8 suited, I don't think it's bad. But I don't think
Jack-8 suited.
Yeah, I keep on saying 7/8 suited.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Jack-8 suited. I don't think it's that bad, but I don't think it's going to be that profitable either. On the button, it's okay. It's I don't feel like you're going to hit the flop often enough with two gapper like that to really make it worthwhile. So, you said that he 3-bets 11%. That's quite high. I think for somebody who just 3-bets their hands, like mostly for value, their 3-betting is going to be around 5%. So I would say 11% is really getting out of line. And then 3-betting a cutoff, open on the button with 9-9. I think that's okay, but I mean that's definitely leaning more towards the aggressive side. I much prefer overcalling there, and we'll talk about why later. So.
Okay. I was just wondering, just generally, basically, sorry, you've got the question there, I suppose. I wouldn't really, I'm not too sure about how to go about exploiting a person that 3-bets far too often.
Well, so a person that 3-bets far too often, so we're going to talk about this in this episode, but one of the things you can start doing is start 4-betting them lighter. And I mean, if he's 3-betting you on the button with pocket 9s and you come over the top with a 4-bet, like, how does he feel about his 9 then? So we will talk about
strategies to combat this.
Yeah, definitely, too. And we'll also kind of talk about why 3-betting 9s is probably not going to be optimal against most players there. Because, yeah, like he flopped a set there, but more often than not, he's not going to flop a set, and more often than not, he's not even going to flop an overpair. So it's just going to be very difficult to play a hand like 9s post-flop in a 3-bet pot unless you have a very good read on the player. And a lot of this is going to come down to reads. which is something we focused, or like player taps, which is something we focused on in the last couple of episodes, and we're continuing to focus here. But today, let's just start with, I kind of have like a loose and a tight range for the first 4 positions, and let's just kind of talk about it and talk about why I have what I have. So under the gun, so this would be considered a very standard tight under the gun range, where you're opening all pocket pairs and suited aces, like high Broadway aces, ace jack suited, king queen suited, and ace jack offsuit. And kind of a looser range, we add a few suited connectors, jack 10 suited through 7-8 suited. We add king queen offsuit. I had the I was debating adding the suited aces, and I think those are fine, but I think that those play much better at the higher stakes, but I just think they're going to be too tough to play somebody who's just starting out at the micros, because players tend to call a lot more loosely at the micros, and they're going to be calling behind with things like 8-7 offsuit, or ace-8 offsuit, or ace-10 offsuit, and it's just going to be too tough to play. And the truth is, you're just not going to hit a flush draw or trips often enough to make it worthwhile. So I think at the micros, folding the suited aces, kind of like the low suited aces and the mid suited aces from under the gun, I think that's good. So like I said, you can't go wrong with the range on the left, and you can start adding some things to the range on the right. But for the most part, you should just play tight under the gun. Andrew, do you have any questions or comments about this?
No, that seems pretty self-explanatory.
I think as you have been, so you're playing 25-0 at the moment, and you've been kind of looking to open up your game. Are there any other hands that you're opening under the gun at this?
No, actually no. That looks very similar. The one on the right looks very similar to my under the gun opening range.
That's good.
I mean, I would obviously, depending on whether they were extremely loose players to my left, but I try to stay away from them anyway. So yeah, looks about right.
Now we're going to move to middle position, or under the gun +1, as soon as my slide moves over. Here we go. So, so here's the tight middle position opening range, where we're still not opening suited aces, and I feel like this is kind of the one on the left is the kind of range where if you're still not really comfortable at a limit, you can stick to. Like, you can't go wrong with the range on the left. And then as you get more comfortable, you can start adding some of the things that are on the right. So as you can see, once you start getting more comfortable at a table, and it doesn't have to be, you could just be like, when you feel more comfortable, even at a table, like you notice that the table's playing tight, or you notice that the table's playing loose, you can go from one to the other. So as you can see, I've added a lot more suited connectors, and even some suited one-gappers, like 7-5 suited. You can certainly open it on some tables from middle position, and I've added some suited aces. So.
Okay. Would this change slightly if we had the kind of player that we're looking to have in the big blind when we're on the button? So a loose passive sort of player. Would this MP loose image on the right be a little a little less than optimal because we know that we're always getting called by the guy on the button.
Yeah,
if he's loose
definitely.
passive.
Yeah, so if a player on the button is just calling too much, then I really would shift more towards the tighter range. And I would probably not open things like ace-2 suited or hands like 9-7 suited.
Okay.
A lot of it depends. I mean, if they're one of those, if we're talking about like a calling station, like he'll call you pre-flop and he'll call you on the flop,
Mm-hmm.
then I would definitely tighten up.
Right.
And then look to just you know just more look to value bet him.
Right.
All right. Now, as you can see, it's a pretty dramatic shift once you start moving into the next two positions in the cutoff, and we'll see what happens on the button. But you can really start opening a much wider range. So I've added pretty much all Broadway cards. Well, this is on the left. This is the cutoff type. So hands like Jack 9 suited, King 9 suited, King 10 offsuit. Then when you move towards the more loose cutoff open, I would start opening hands like 10-9 offsuit, 9-8 offsuit, 7-8 offsuit. All these hands are going to be profitable in given the right circumstances. So of course, once people start noticing that you're starting to open up too tight, then or too loose, then you can revert back to this more tighter opening range. But yeah, that's it. Now we'll look at what happens on the button. So these are my suggested button opening ranges. You can pretty much open any ace on the button. This is kind of the first time that I start opening offsuit aces. Like, I probably would not open ace-8 offsuit from the cutoff at the micros unless you have, well, unless you've got really, really tight players behind you. But you know, if you have really tight players in the next three seats to your left, then that's probably not a very good table. But on the button, you should definitely open you know, any ace. I would open all suited kings. Just the range of hands is just tremendous as far as the kind of hands you can open on the button and play pretty profitably. So look at the hands kind of on the right side, and yeah, you know, you should still probably not be opening hands like 9-4 suited, but hands like 9-5 suited, 9-6 suited, 10-6 suited, all these should be fair game in the right circumstances. So, yeah, do you have any questions and comments on this?
I think it's, well, I think, you know, if you're just looking at it right away, it looks like an enormous number of hands. But I think, yeah, as long as you constantly bear in mind the fact that you have to adapt your ranges exactly to the opponents you're facing, then as opposed to just being like, you know, I'm on the button, so rigidly I'm going to open 53.2% of all my hands.
Yeah, right.
Then you should be fine as long as you're, you know, being more fluid between the two.
Right. And I mean, it should be all. You should be really paying attention to your image and how the table is playing. So I feel like, you know, reading the dynamics of the table is just so important, which is why we talked about the player types before we even talked about starting hands. But that's just kind of like a general guideline. And obviously post-flop is going to be a lot more interesting. But we do I do want to lay the groundwork for just the different ranges. All right. Limpers. So this is a discussion that I've had with quite a few people, and we haven't really come to much of a conclusion. But I feel like at the micro stakes, um, this will serve us pretty well. So if you have a couple limpers ahead, you are faced with a decision on whether you want to raise it up or whether you want to limp along. So I feel like, and hands like these suited one gappers and like small suited one gappers and small suited connectors, along with some suited aces, play pretty well in multi-way pots and positions. So if you're on the button or the cutoff and you have like one or two limpers, you can limp these along. Usually, if you have like two limpers and you're in the cutoff on the button, just limp these along and see a flop, and it's gonna play pretty well. Now, hands like these are not gonna play as well when you limp these along. So you should probably raise these kind of hands to isolate. We're talking about the Broadway cards and some of the higher suited connectors and suited one gappers. Sevens, I feel like they're just strong enough to isolate, but there's some situations where limping them along is fine too. One of the advantages of like raising something like pocket fours with two limpers is that if you do hit a set, it builds, like the pot is already built and you can get more money in. But I feel like that's just not going to happen enough. And at the micro stakes, you'll still get paid off quite nicely when you hit your set. And with four people in the pot, it's just much more likely that somebody has a piece of it. So that debate is still not over on whether you should be like, never over limping, always raising. But I feel like for a beginning player, this is a pretty good guideline. So raise these up in position and limp these along. And I know, Andrew, that I think you've been raising some suited aces, ISO raising some suited aces, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have with mixed results.
So, yeah, like as you get more experienced and as you feel more comfortable post flop, you can certainly start doing that. But I think for most micro stakes players, limping this range is going to suit them well. So a couple things to consider is whether you do decide to overlimp or ISO raise is the players at the table. So how often do you get multiple callers and says and forces you to play out of position? What I meant by that is like if you're in the cutoff and somebody limps in early position, like somebody limps not when you're in the cutoff, when you are in the middle position or on the gun +1, and under the gun limps, and you have something like ace-2 suited. Well, if people are going to fold behind you, if you ISO raise this, then it's going to be profitable. But if you're going to get a bunch of callers, then you should just be limping that along. So, and of course, you should be a lot more prone to raising when you're on the button. So, okay. Now let's look at some stuff about 3-betting. So, and that's an area that I feel like a lot of players at the micro and low limits are just not comfortable with. And we're going to talk about why 3-betting a hand like pocket nines is usually going to be a bad idea, unless you have a good read. So, but for starters, every time you 3-bet somebody and you get away with it, it helps to grow your image. So people notice the fact that you're 3-betting a lot, and what ends up happening is they won't fold to you at all. If they hit any kind of flop, then you're going to be getting paid. Now you've got to keep that in mind. As your image at a table is crazy, you have to start thinking more in terms of value than in terms of bluffing. Now, if somebody's really not getting out of line, then their 3-bet percentage is going to be around 5%, something that I've noticed. So if somebody's 3-betting 7% or more, you know that they're going to be 3-betting you light. And yeah, and so I'm debating whether I want to talk about right now how to combat light 3-betting, but let's wait with that.
Okay.
Now, so a polarized range, and I'm going to give an example of a polarized range, but when you're 3-betting, your reason for doing so should be much more important than your actual hand. So you should be very clear on whether you're 3-betting for value or 3-betting as a bluff. So and the two examples that I give is if you have aces on the button and a loose player opens, we're going to be raising him because we expect him to call with much worse and play out of position against us. So there, it's just a clear example of 3-betting for value. And if a player also folds to 85% of 3-bets, then 3-betting him light is also going to be profitable. But there again, we have to be pretty clear on whether we're doing it for value or as a bluff. So here's an example of a polarized range. So let's say that a pretty tight player opens under the gun, and we know that they fold to like 70%, or let's say they fold to like, I don't know, like 60% of 3-bets. Then if we 3-bet him with this kind of a range, like aces, ace-king suited, ace-king offsuit, kings, queens, 9-7 suited, 9-6 suited, 8-6 suited, all the way down to like 7-4 suited, which Brian Townsend said is his favorite hand. So what that does is, one, it's really easy to play this pre-flop. So if he like 4-bets us, then queens. It's very hard for me to fold queens to 6 max. So like these hands are going to be pretty easy to play, and then these hands are also going to be pretty easy to play. Now, if he calls us, all these hands are going to be pretty easy to play post flop as well, because with ace king, well, if we hit an ace or a king, we know we're going to be good. With aces, kings, and queens, if we hit an overpair, we know we're going to be good in a re-raised pot. I mean, sometimes somebody will hit a set on us and things like that, but we're not going to worry about that. It's still going to be pretty easy to play post flop with 100 BB stacks. And hands like 7-4 suited are also going to be pretty easy to play, because if we hit an ace or a king, we can certainly continuation bet that and expect to get a fold. Sometimes even if we hit a queen, then we're going to be able to continuation bet that. And then if we hit something like trips or a flush draw or a straight draw or a straight or a flush, then it's going to be pretty easy to play. The problem with pocket nines is there it's just going to be much tougher to play. So if I'm 3-betting pocket nines, then it really has to be in order for me to 3-bet pocket nines in position, one of a couple things has to be true. Like one, the player is a complete maniac and calls with like, just never folds to a 3-bet, and then, if I hit an overpair, then I'm just going to be stacking him. But I feel like one is high variance, and B, you're just not going to be getting paid off enough. So same with kind of 3-betting tens. So if you have a pretty tight under the gun raiser and you're on the button and he raises and you 3-bet tens it's just going to be tough to play because like no flop that doesn't have a 10 are you going to be comfortable at? Because if it's low cards, he could have a set. You can't stand up 4-bet. These hands like jacks through 8s, I think they're usually pretty bad to 3-bet with to like early position raisers, and they play pretty well post flop. So now, of course, if you have somebody raising on the button and you have jacks or 10s, then of course the situation shifts to where we are 3-betting these for value. But anyhow, that's a little bit about a polarized range and why we should be 3-betting with a polarized range, just so that it's really easy to play pre-flop and post-flop. I also made a little note with a hand like 7-8 suited. I feel like people are kind of like 3-bet happy these days, and 7-8 suited, when you're on the button, it's okay to 3-bet it, as long as you're including that in this kind of like bluffy. I mean, of course, it's kind of bluffy, but it plays so well in position. Just call and see a flop with it, and play some post-flop poker. All right, so that's a little bit about 3-betting. Andrew, when you're 3-betting, is this kind of like the fundamental question that you're asking yourself, like whether you're doing it as a bluffer for value?
I think well, yeah, definitely. I think most of the time I would say I 3-bet for value as opposed to bluffing, but I've certainly been trying to mix it into my game a bit more when I feel like I've got a hand that's got too much value to fold, but can't really play very well out of position if I just flat call. So I'd prefer to 3-bet that kind of hand because I feel like I can take it down a fair bit pre-flop, and then I also know that it plays well post-flop because I'm never going to lose, a big hand or a big pot with my bluffs.
So what kind of hand are you talking about there?
Probably, yeah, just like a 6-8 suited or like a Jack-8 suited, something like that.
Okay.
Something that I feel like I might flop a big draw with, but I also know that if I c-bet on a good flop, I'm picking my flops to c-bet as well.
Sure.
And if I pick a good flop c-bet and I get called, well then I can shut down if I've got air.
Right.
Although I will admit that I do tend to 3-bet with 9s through jacks, and I suppose that's possibly a leak of mine, and I probably get into a lot more difficult situations than I should.
A lot of it depends like where you are. I mean, if somebody opens on the button and you have 9s in the blinds, then I think it's certainly a good situation to 3-bet. And again, it kind of depends on the player, but those are just much more difficult hands to be 3-betting profitably. And the thing about it is, like, they just have so much value post flop too, that you just don't need to go crazy with them.
Where do you draw the line though, when you're 3-betting? Because at times you're 3-betting, for example, when you're bluffing to get a fold.
Yes.
But let's say you were 3-betting with 9s in the blinds versus a button raise. Generally, you don't want to be seeing a flop with those 9s because so often there's going to be overcards on the flop, and so it's going to be fairly difficult to play out of position once you've been called. But you also know that a lot of the time you're going to get folds, so you'll pick up his opening raise a fair amount as well. I'm just wondering about where you draw the line between turning 9-9 into a bluff there or doing it for value.
It really depends on the player. I mean, that's just so tough to play, so tough to say. But like, let's say that they're going to be calling me. Let's say they're opening a hand like 7-5 suited, and it's just so tough to play. I think we're going to have to get into a lot more examples of hands like that in kind of maybe like in the next episode. But Yeah, so I think for the next episode, I'm going to come up with just a lot more examples of hands like that.
Okay, and just one more thing, just really quickly. When you are electing to three bet lighter, so for example, if you did have nines or tens, would you be three betting a loose passive player who opened in late position, or would you be a lot happier opening a tighter sort of regular?
Definitely not a tighter regular, because I feel like a tight regular is going to make good decisions. So like if I have my nines, if I have my nines or tens, um, I mean, so much of it depends. Like let's say a tight regular opens on the button and the small blind folds, and it comes back around to me, and I have like nines in the big blind. Um,
Mhm.
well, sometimes I'm gonna three bet um, just to kind of protect my hand. Other times I'm gonna be worried less about protecting my hand and more about like. Usually in that case, I'm going to be betting to protect my hand because it's going to be tough to play out of position. Um,
Mhm.
and I feel like, yeah, he'll fold, but like either way, against a good solid player, nines out of position, it's just going to be tough to play. But like in position, let's say they open from the cutoff and I'm in position with my pocket nines. Well, like even if the flop has an overcard, they're probably going to be betting it at least, they're probably going to be betting like most flops, and I'm going to be able to call them, and they're probably going to be shutting down on a turn if they missed, or they're usually going to be pot controlling on the turn. So I feel like nines, they just play so well in position, but out of position it's just a lot tougher, which is why we're going to spend the next episode talking about how to play hands like that out of position.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right. So now let's talk about the good candidates of people to three bet light. So, for example, somebody who calls a lot of three bets but check folds a lot of flops to c bets. Um, that's just like the perfect candidate to do it, and you'll know who they are once you start three betting them a little bit. So it's pretty important to start three betting kind of early when you sit down at a table, just so that you get an idea of how people react to your three bets. Also, somebody who three bets, who folds to a lot of three bets, is also a good candidate to do it, just because you'll make money and your image is going to grow. So every time you successfully three bet somebody, your image continues to grow, and eventually you pick up aces and you three bet somebody one too many times and they just go crazy. And you know how that works. You know the feeling when somebody's three betting you a lot. You're just like you're like, let me just get ace jack and I'm gonna make a stand, and
Mm.
it's nice. Finally, if somebody opens too much from certain positions, they're just not going to be able to take the heat. So if somebody opens too much from under the gun, or if somebody opens too much on the button, you're just going to be able to three bet them profitably, because they're just not going to have hands that are going to be able to stand any kind of heat.
Mhm.
So yeah, so if somebody's opening a lot from the cutoff, and you're on the button, then three bet them, and they're probably opening hands like 7-8 offsuit, and they just can't stand the heat.
Is that where I mean, in that sort of instance, is that where I mean, how would you play hands like Ace Jack or Ace Ten, to a cutoff raise if you were on the button? Would you be three betting almost as a bluff, or would you just be flat calling with those kind of hands even if you feel like the guy raises light in position?
If I feel somebody raises light in position, a hand like Ace 10 and Ace Jack suited, I'm definitely just flat calling there, because it's just going to be profitable to play post flop, and the reason for that is they're probably opening a lot of dominated hands, hands like Jack 10
Okay.
offsuit, Queen Jack offsuit, um, like 9-10, 8-10, King 10, etc. So if I'm sitting there with like a suited Ace Jack or Ace 10, then it's also going to be pretty easy to play, because if I flop an Ace or a Jack, I'm just going to call him and then maybe get some value later. Even hands like an offsuit Ace Jack, I think it's still going to be profitable to just flat call in position.
Okay. So even in position, you maintain the polarized three betting range.
Yeah, for the most part. Because, I mean,
Okay.
Ace 10
Cool.
offsuit, it plays pretty well post flop
Okay.
to like a loose cutoff open.
Hmm.
Now, sometimes,
Yeah, I understand.
like, I mean, with a hand like Ace 10 offsuit, let's think about it. Um, Once you 3-bet, and I feel like a lot of this just comes from like experience of playing heads up, where you play a lot of 3-bet pots, but a hand like Ace 10 offsuit, if you 3-bet and the player is very likely to, so they're opening hands like 9-10, Queen 10, Jack 10, King 10, etc. They're opening all these hands. And if you're sitting on a hand like Ace 10, then you've got those hands crushed. So if you see a flop and it has a 10, then you're going to be able to take him to value town. On the other hand, if you 3-bet that, then they might call you with hands like Ace Queen or Ace Jack. They might call you pre-flop, but they're probably going to fold hands like 8-10, 9-10, etc., etc. So by 3-betting, you're folding out the hands that you want to be up against, on the flop. And even if you miss the flop, so more often, like most of the time, a flop is not going to contain an ace or it's not going to contain a 10, but you can still float a wide range of flops. So, and if you miss, I mean, there's no harm in folding either. But there's a lot more value, I feel like, by calling a hand like Ace 10 offsuit.
Okay. I think I understand what you mean. By three betting,
You
you'll get
fold out a
yourself
lot
into
of hands
positions
that you
where,
want to play against, basically.
yeah, they've got they've got reverse implied
Oh,
odds.
totally, yeah.
If you start to three bet them.
Right.
Okay.
But they'll also like, yeah. So, and with a hand like Ace 10 offsuit or Jack 10 offsuit or like Ace Jack offsuit, um, you're also not going to ever lose a huge pot if you just flat call pre-flop. But you can win a good share of medium-sized spots.
Right.
All right, now let's talk a little bit about squeezing. So the important thing about squeezing is, again, you want to do it with a polarized range. So a typical situation to do it is if a solid regular, I think I've got two spaces here. If a solid regular is isolating a bad player, you can re-isolate them. And what I mean by that is, let's say a fish limps from under the gun +1, and there's a good player that's playing in the cutoff, and this player isolates. Well, you know that they're going to be isolating, so you can certainly re-isolate them. And this is going to be profitable. Squeezing, it's going to be particularly used when we are in the blinds. So we'll focus a lot more of that in the next episode when we talk about playing out of position. But kind of the textbook situation is loose player opens, tight aggressive player calls. So you can squeeze because loose player is just playing loose, and the tag is set mining. And while both players might know that you're squeezing, your 3-bet size makes it hard for them to do anything. And that's the thing about a squeeze is it's usually much more than a normal 3-bet, which is what makes it effective. It just makes it really awkward for anybody to play back against it. So, and I made a little note about why squeezing works. So a lot of people, when you squeeze, they will recognize it as a squeeze. And they might think that you're making a move, but more often than not, they're not going to have the guts to 4-bet you unless they're doing it for value. So what they'll do is they'll call pre-flop with a wide range, and they'll say, like, they're going to have the intention of, like, shoving draws or, like, pairs or things like that, or stacking you with a set. So this is kind of like their intention. But then the flop comes, and more often than not, they're going to completely miss. So even if they call pre-flop with like a suited connector, like 75% of the time, they're just not going to hit anything. And more often than not, 32% of the time, a flop will have an ace or a king or something like that, or a queen, and you're going to be able to continuation bet. And then you're just putting them in a very difficult situation. So for you, it's going to be pretty easy to play because more often than not, they're going to be folding. But basically, they call with something like 7-5 suited, and they've got these grand visions of the flop, giving them like a straight flush draw or a straight or a flush trips. But the flop comes ace 7-5, and or let's say like giving them but even then it's going to be play, right? Because you see that once and you give up. But like more often than not, like they're just going to miss, or they're going to hit some kind of like lowly middle pair or something. Hold on one second. Sorry. Yeah, and it's just like it's just going to be profitable, and more often than not, especially if you're doing it in position, you're going to be able to see bet a wide range of flops, and it's going to be profitable. And again, it's important to do it with a polarized range, so you have a pretty good idea of where you stand.
Yeah.
Now, 4-betting. So if a loose player is 3-betting you light, and we defined light 3-betting as 3-betting percentage is greater than 9%, 4-betting is going to be very effective in slowing them down. So in a situation where you said that the player's opening is 3-betting 11% of the hands, and we know 9s are in his range, once we know that 9s are in his range, 4-betting him, it's just going to be very effective because they're just going to have to fold a lot of hands. And we'll talk about 4-bet sizing in a minute, but it's also going to be a lot better to 4-bet from middle position and under the gun versus a button raiser because you're going to get more respect. So if you're in the cutoff and you 4-bet the button, they might be willing to shove with a much greater range, whereas if you 4-bet somebody that's 3-betting you from the button, like they just can't feel comfortable with it, pretty much any hand. So if you a tire player like opens from under the gun, and a player 3-bets you with a hand like ace queen or jacks or 10s from the button, and you 4-bet them, like they just got to feel really crappy about their hand. So that's going to be profitable. Okay. And I said cutoff open versus a 3-bet from the blinds is also going to be a pretty good spot to 3-bet versus active players. So if you feel that somebody is just 3-betting you relentlessly from out of the blinds, and I'm not sure how often that's the case at the micros, but 4-betting will usually slow them down. Now let's talk about 4-bet sizing. All right, so now it's really important to know whether somebody will like flat call your 3-bet. Flat call your 4-bet. It should be 4-bets.
Okay. This was actually going to be my question.
Yeah.
This is good.
Okay, so here we go. So let's say you open at 35 cents and somebody makes it $1.15 and you make it $2.65. So that leaves you with $7.35, and if they flat call, the pot's going to be $5.30. So what that does is it leaves the villain room to play both pre-flop and post-flop. And that's usually good because, once you give them some rope, they're just going to be able to make a lot more bad decisions. So they can either fold pre-flop, or they can shove pre-flop, or they can call. It just gives them more room to maneuver. And when you're doing that with good hands, then it's also going to give you more room to maneuver. But let's say that you make it 35 and they make it $1.15, kind of in the second example, and then you just pot it up to like 350. Well, that leaves you with 650, and if they flat call, the flop has $7, and you really can't do much other than like shove or fold any flop. So that's not a very good bet size because it restricts what you can do and it restricts what the villain can do.
Right.
The last example that you can do is if you make it 35 and somebody makes it $1.15, and you can just move all in. And I said that this sends a message, and you can do this with hands like kings or ace king, and sometimes you can do it with jacks or queens versus very loose players. So versus somebody that I feel like, if I have pocket jacks and I'm opening from the cutoff, and somebody 3-bets me from the button, and I feel like they're going to be 3-betting me light, then sometimes I'll just move all in with jacks. And the reason for that is too often a flop will have an overpair or an overcard, and I feel like they'll convince themselves that I have ace king, and they'll call with something like pocket 8s or pocket 9s or pocket 10s. So sometimes going all in is going to be profitable. So, but those are kind of your three options, and I feel like the first option is good, and I feel like the last option is pretty good in some situations, but I feel like here this is seldom good because it just leaves very little room to maneuver. So again, it's almost like the 4-bets or the 4-bet sizing is again kind of polarized. So have you seen Karate Kid?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Where the what's the master's name? I can't remember, but he gives
Mr.
Mr. Miyagi. That's right, and he talks about the grape, and he said, if the grape is on the left side of the road, I think I'm going to butcher the example. Or like, if you walk on the left side of the road, it's okay, and if you walk on the right side of the road, it's okay too. But if you're in the middle, you're just going to get run over. I think I totally butchered the example, but or the quote. But that's the general idea. That's the whole idea about like 3-betting with a polarized range and having your 4-bet sizing be again kind of polarized, and kind of avoiding that middle.
It's a very apt example.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you something just really quickly about stack sizes and how this might change.
Oh yeah,
a little bit.
This assumes 100 BB stack sizes. So
should you always be working? I mean, should you always be working with relative stack sizes in the
oh,
game?
absolutely.
So,
Yeah, sure,
I mean,
sure.
Okay. So you can increase it relative to the stack size, but you never want to be caught in no man's land where you bet over a third of the pot and you're committed to shoving. I mean, a third of your stack and you're committed to shoving. Anything.
Yeah, and I think that's let me. So we can say, don't get caught in no man's land. Right? So, yeah, and I'm a lot more apt. If somebody has like $5 and they 3-bet me and I have something like ace king, or if somebody even has like $6, so if they're sitting on like 60 BBs or less, and I have like jacks, queens, I'm just going to be shoving that all in. So I'm a lot more likely to do this. So I guess as stacks go bigger, I'm a lot more likely to do this. And as stacks get smaller, I'm a lot more likely to do this. The few instances where I will do this is where a player is absolutely nuts and they never fold and have like aces or kings, then I'm just going to be, I just hit pot. I just pot, because they never fold. But that's a pretty rare example. But basically, as stack sizes get bigger, this is kind of my default. As stack sizes get smaller, this is my default.
Okay, excellent.
Now, for next week, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get out of line and position. So I want you to play a session of 250 hands where your 3-bet percentage is, let's say, 9 or higher.
Okay.
And I want you to find 6 hands from the session, and I want you to give me the reasons of why you chose to 3-bet them. Now, some of them are going to be pretty easy. Some of them are going to be aces, kings, or ace-king, and the reason you 3-bet those is because you have aces, kings, or ace-king. But I also want you to, I want you to give me those hands, and we'll talk about the post-flop implications of that too. And 3 of those, I want you to be 3-betting light or bluffing. And I want you to really focus on like why you picked the specific spot that you did to 3-bet. Now, those 250 hands, I want you to play those, get a lot of, let me say, play only 3 tables max. So
okay.
For that session of 250 hands, I want you to play no more than 3 tables. I would almost prefer you to play 2 tables because you'll really be able to focus on like a game flow. But I'll add a 3rd table in there if you want to, because sometimes we'll be card dead and not only are we card dead, but like nobody's ever folding. So.
Okay.
Also, I want you to share 2 hands where you squeeze light because the situation called for it. So, by 3-betting,
Okay.
I mean just 3-betting a single player. But by squeezing, I meant there's somebody opens and somebody flat calls, and then you squeeze. Now, these squeezes don't have to be included in this session, but I just want you to over the next week or so look for a situation where you do end up squeezing. But this is what I want.
But squeezing light.
Yeah,
sure.
squeezing light.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's what I want you to focus on, and also I'm going to add to this. Finally, write up how the table started trying to adjust to your aggro image.
Okay.
So yeah, so just write like a paragraph or so about how the dynamics of the session started influencing the way people are playing you. And then after that, we'll just talk about how that went, and we'll review some of the hands from the session, and we'll talk about the implications of this little experiment on future play.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So in the next episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about playing out of the blinds, which is going to include a lot of squeezing and 3-betting. And finally, we really didn't have any preset hand examples this session, but we're going to get into those a lot more in the next session. It's tough to really go over a lot of hands without talking about post-flop play. So in pre-flop play, I just mostly wanted to give some theory. But the time has definitely come for some hand examples. So we're gonna do that. But we're also gonna start with. Let me actually include that in here. Oops. Starting with Andrew's homework on 3-betting light, etc. All right. So, do you have any final comments or thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
Honestly, no. I think I got through all the questions I wanted to ask while we went through it. So yeah, I'm pretty happy.
All right, cool. Then for card runners, this is Paul Nazarevich or Vernier, and I'm here with Andrew. So until next time.